The castle stood silent under a sky heavy with unfallen snow when Garrick Ironclaw returned from 3 weeks of northern patrol. His boots made no sound on the frost-hardened earth as he approached through the eastern path, the one that led to the service entrance near the kitchens. Years of tracking prey had taught him how to move through darkness without disturbing it, and tonight he had no desire to wake the castle guards with formal announcements of his arrival. He was exhausted, bone-weary in a way that went beyond physical fatigue. The kind of tiredness that settled into your marrow when you spent weeks maintaining vigilance against threats that never quite materialized into open conflict. The patrol had been longer than anticipated, stretching from what should have been a routine 10-day border inspection into 3 full weeks of calculated tension. Theron Blackridge's warriors had been testing boundaries with the methodical patience of experienced tacticians. No direct confrontations, nothing that could be called an act of war, but provocations nonetheless. Campfires positioned just inside their own territory, but visible from the border posts. Hunting parties that strayed too close to the dividing line, always with plausible explanations for their presence. Scouts who appeared and disappeared like smoke, never quite where you expected them, but always close enough to be noticed. It was the kind of deliberate testing that required constant vigilance and meticulous documentation. Every sighting had to be recorded, every position marked on maps, every patrol route adjusted to account for new patterns of movement. Garrick had commanded his warriors to show strength without aggression, presence without provocation. Walking that knife edge for 3 weeks had worn him down in ways that actual combat rarely did. The uncertainty exhausted him more than battle ever could. In combat, you knew where you stood. Enemy before you. Objective clear. Victory or death. But this slow dance of territorial positioning, this chess game played with lives and land, it required a different kind of endurance. The endurance to watch and wait, to calculate probabilities, to make decisions knowing that every choice rippled outward in ways you could not fully predict. At 32, Garrick had held the crown for 5 years, ever since his father fell defending these same borders. The memory remained vivid despite the passage of time. His father, the great Alduin Ironclaw, bleeding out on frozen ground while Corvus Thornheart held pressure on the wound and screamed for healers who arrived too late. Corvus had been the last person his father spoke to, receiving final commands about the succession, about maintaining the alliance networks, about protecting the pack above all else. That deathbed loyalty had earned Corvus unquestioned authority as Beta, a position he had held through both reigns. 3 years ago, Garrick lost his mate Lyanna to an ambush in those same northern forests. The grief had carved something permanent into his bones, a hollow place that duty filled but could never satisfy. She had been patrolling with a small team, standard reconnaissance that should have been routine. Instead, they walked into a carefully planned trap. Theron Blackridge's warriors had separated her from the others, cornered her in a ravine where the cliffs made escape impossible. By the time Garrick reached her, following the howls of distress that echoed through the trees, she was already gone. Throat torn, eyes open to a sky she could no longer see. He had killed 3 of her attackers that night, would have killed more if they had not retreated into their own territory, daring him to cross the border and start a war. Theron himself had watched from a distant ridge, too far for engagement, but close enough to be seen. Close enough to make it clear this was personal, that it was a message. The hollow place Lyanna's death left had not healed. Garrick had learned to function around it, to perform his duties as Alpha King with competence if not passion. He led council meetings, he commanded warriors, he made decisions about territory and trade and justice. But the emotional dimension, the capacity to feel anything beyond duty and responsibility, that had died with her, or so he had believed. He was Alpha King, sovereign over all shifter territories from the Iron Mountains to the coastal cliffs, and the weight of that authority sat heavier with each passing season. Leadership without connection felt like wearing armor that no longer fit properly. Protective, yes. Necessary, certainly. But increasingly uncomfortable, chafing in places you could not quite reach. The kitchen door opened without resistance. He stepped into warmth and the lingering smell of bread, baked hours earlier. The great hearth dominated one wall, its stones blackened by generations of use. the kind of deep soot staining that spoke to centuries of fires burning in the same place. Clay pots hung from iron hooks. Copper vessels gleamed dully in the low light. The wooden prep tables showed the wear patterns of countless meal preparations, grooves worn smooth by thousands of knife strokes. He expected emptiness at this hour, the dead space between midnight and dawn, when even the most diligent servants slept. The kitchen should have been cold, the hearth banked for the night, everything cleaned and put away according to the rigid protocols that governed castle life. Instead, he found activity, found her. A young woman knelt before the hearth, her back to him as she scraped ash from the stones with methodical precision. She wore a simple dress of undyed linen, the fabric thin and worn, patched in several places with thread that did not quite match. The patches themselves told a story. Not recent repairs done by skilled hands, but accumulated over time, each one slightly cruder than the last, as if the person doing the mending had progressively less time or care to devote to the task. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her spine, strands escaping to frame a face he could only see in profile. She worked quickly, silently, organizing her cleaning supplies with the kind of systematic efficiency he recognized immediately. This was not casual work. This was something else. Garrick had commanded warriors for 5 years, soldiers for longer than that. He knew what military organization looked like. The economical movements that wasted no energy, the tools arranged in precise order, each one returning to exactly the same position after use. The bucket positioned exactly an arm's length away, measured not by conscious thought, but by muscle memory. The scrub brush placed bristles down at a 45-degree angle so it would be ready for the next use without adjustment. Most servants cleaned with casual competence, the practiced efficiency of people who did this work daily but did not think about optimization. This woman moved like someone conducting a military operation, someone who had been trained to think about positioning and efficiency and eliminating unnecessary movement, someone who had learned that wasted motion could be punished. The observation struck him with uncomfortable force. Why would a kitchen servant clean with military precision? Why at this hour, alone, when no one would witness or evaluate her work? The questions formed in his mind even as recognition followed. He knew her. Or rather, he knew of her. Ember Thornhart, daughter of Beta Corvus Thornhart, his father's most trusted advisor, and now his own second-in-command. He had seen her occasionally over the years, always in the background of larger gatherings, always silent and still. She rarely attended formal events, and when she did, she remained at the edges of rooms with eyes downcast, taking up as little space as possible. At those few occasions when circumstance placed them in the same space, she had never looked directly at him, never spoken unless explicitly addressed, and even then, only in monosyllables that ended conversations rather than continued them. He realized with uncomfortable clarity that he knew almost nothing about her beyond her name and parentage. She was 24 years old, the same age Liana would have been if she had lived, the daughter of his Beta, which should have meant she held some status within pack hierarchy, some visibility and authority by virtue of her bloodline. Instead, she was scrubbing hearthstones alone in the middle of the night, invisible even within her own pack. How had that happened? When had it started? And more importantly, why had no one, including himself, thought to question it? He took a step forward, intending to announce his presence rather than startle her. The floorboard creaked beneath his weight. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. She jerked upright, spinning toward the sound with a gasp that echoed off the stone walls. The movement pulled her dress tight across her shoulders. The worn fabric tore further at the seam, and the right side of her bodice fell away, exposing her shoulder and the upper curve of her back. What Garrick saw made his wolf surge forward with sudden, violent fury. Her skin was a landscape of brutality. Fresh welts, angry and red, crossed older scars that had healed white and raised. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone with military training. These were not accidental injuries. These were deliberate, systematic, administered with precision designed to cause maximum pain while avoiding permanent damage to vital areas. He had seen these marks before on soldiers being disciplined for severe infractions. Training lash marks, the kind made by weighted leather strips used in the practice yards. Ember gasped, her green eyes wide with terror as she recognized him. She grabbed at the torn fabric, trying desperately to cover herself, but her hands shook so violently she could barely hold it in place. "Your Majesty." The words caught in her throat. She dropped into an awkward curtsy, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. "I did not know you had returned. I was just finishing the hearth before morning. I will leave at once." "Stop!" The word came out harder than he intended. His wolf was too close to the surface, responding to the scent of blood and fear that filled the small space. He forced himself to gentle his tone. "Stand up. Do not bow." She obeyed, but kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Her whole body trembled. The fear scent intensified, sharp and acrid. It made something twist painfully in his chest. This was not the fear of someone caught doing something wrong. This was the fear of someone who expected violence. "How did you get those marks?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. The pattern was too familiar. He had commanded warriors for years, had seen what military discipline looked like when it crossed the line into abuse. "I fell." She said it quickly, too quickly. "Yesterday I fell down the stairs carrying water. It was clumsy of me." "Look at me!" She flinched at the command but raised her eyes. In the dim firelight, he could see they were a striking green, the color of new leaves in spring. They were also filled with such profound terror that it made his breath catch. This was not ordinary fear. This was the bone-deep certainty that pain was coming. "Those marks were not made by falling," Garrick said carefully. He kept his distance, sensing that if he moved closer, she might bolt like a wounded animal. "Those are whip marks, from a training lash specifically, the kind used in the practice yards for soldiers who break formation." Her lips pressed together. She said nothing, but her hands twisted in the torn fabric of her dress until her knuckles went white. "Who did this to you?" "No one, Your Majesty. I told you I fell." "Ember." He made her name a gentle question rather than a demand. "I can see at least 24 scars on your back, and those are only the ones visible. Some of them are years old. You did not get those from falling." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back with fierce determination. "Please," the word came out as a whisper. "Please, I must return home before dawn. If I am late, there will be consequences." The careful phrasing told him everything. Consequences. Not from neglecting her duties, but from someone who monitored her movements, someone who would punish tardiness. "Turn around," he said quietly. "Let me see your back." "Your Majesty, please." That was not a request. She turned slowly, lowering the torn fabric completely. What he saw made his vision go red at the edges. The fresh welts were even worse than he had initially thought. Some had broken the skin, leaving thin lines of dried blood. But it was the older scars that truly horrified him. Layers upon layers of them, crisscrossing her entire back from shoulders to waist. Some were thin lines, others thick and ropey from improper healing. This had been happening for years. Many years. "Who?" The word came out as a growl. His wolf was too close now, pushing against his control. "Tell me who did this!" Her shoulders hunched inward, making herself smaller. "I cannot or will not." "It does not matter." Her voice was barely audible. "Please, Your Majesty, I am no one. I am less than no one. What happens to me is of no concern to anyone. I just need to finish my work and go home." "Less than no one?" Garrick moved closer, unable to stop himself. She tensed but did not flee. "You are the daughter of my beta. You are a member of this pack. That makes you very much my concern. My father would not agree with that assessment." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Her eyes went wide with horror at her own admission. I did not." Understanding crashed over Garrick with sickening clarity. The military precision of the scars, the access to training weapons, the authority to discipline without question, the careful isolation that had kept her invisible for years. Beta Corvus, her own father. "Show me your arms," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Your Majesty." "Now." She pulled up her sleeves with shaking hands. More scars, burns from hot metal on her forearms, bruises in various stages of healing circling her wrists where she had been restrained, defensive wounds on her palms where she had tried to protect herself. The wolf inside Garrick howled for release. He wanted to shift, to hunt, to tear apart whoever had done this. But the girl in front of him was already terrified. If he lost control now, he would only make it worse. "You will not return home tonight," he said with absolute finality. "There are servant quarters here in the castle. You will sleep there." "I cannot." Panic edged into her voice. There will be, please, Your Majesty, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly." Garrick met her eyes, letting her see the cold fury he felt. "And I am telling you that you will not leave this castle tonight. That is a direct order from your Alpha King. Do you intend to disobey?" She stared at him, trapped between two sources of authority, and clearly expecting punishment regardless of which she chose. Finally, she whispered, "No, Your Majesty." "Good." He moved to the door and called out. A guard appeared within moments, looking surprised to see the king. "Summon Astrid Wolfsbane. Tell her to meet me at the eastern servant quarters immediately." The guard glanced at Ember with curiosity, but had the sense not to ask questions. "Yes, Your Majesty." Garrick turned back to Ember. "You will go with Astrid. She is a warrior, a veteran of the northern campaigns. She will ensure no one disturbs you tonight. The room will have a lock on the inside. You control who enters." Astrid arrived quickly, a woman in her late 30s with silver threading her dark hair and the efficient bearing of someone who had seen combat. Her eyes swept over Ember's torn dress and exposed scars, and something hardened in her expression. "She needs protection," Garrick said simply, "and she may need someone who understands." Astrid's jaw tightened. She had that look he recognized from veterans, the one that said she knew exactly what kind of trauma she was looking at. "I understand, Your Majesty. Come with me, girl. You are safe now." Ember looked at Garrick one more time. There was no gratitude in her expression, only exhaustion and resignation. She expected this protection to be temporary. She expected to eventually pay for this night of safety. As Astrid led her away, Garrick stood alone in the kitchen. The smell of her blood still hung in the air, mixing with old fear and newer desperation. His wolf circled restlessly, unsatisfied with merely removing her from immediate danger. It wanted more. It wanted justice. It wanted to understand why his wolf cared so much about someone he barely knew. He ran a hand through his dark hair, feeling the weight of his beard against his palm. 3 years since Liana's death, and he had felt nothing. No interest in potential mates, no desire for connection. He had assumed that part of him had died with her. But standing in this kitchen, looking at the blood-stained ash where Ember had been working, he felt something stir. Not attraction, not yet. Something more fundamental, a bone-deep certainty that she was important, that what happened to her mattered in ways he could not yet explain. Dawn would come in a few hours. He needed to think clearly before taking action, but he knew sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see those scars. Every time he breathed, he would smell that fear. His beta. Corvus, who had served his father for decades, who had pledged loyalty to Garrick himself, who sat in council meetings and made decisions about pack law and justice. That same man went home and systematically brutalized his own daughter. How many others knew? How many had seen and said nothing? How long had she been invisible, suffering in silence while the rest of them went about their duties? The questions circled through his mind as the first gray light began to filter through the kitchen windows. He would need evidence, documentation, witnesses. This was not something that could be handled with simple royal decree. Corvus was beta, second in authority only to the Alpha King himself. Removing him would require proof that satisfied even the most skeptical council members. Garrick spent the next week conducting what amounted to a military intelligence operation. He moved carefully, deliberately, treating it like reconnaissance into enemy territory. The stakes were too high for mistakes. He began with observation protocols, the same kind of intelligence-gathering operation he would mount before engaging an enemy position. 3 trusted warriors, veterans he knew would keep confidence and follow orders without needing extensive explanation, took shifts watching Ember's movements throughout the castle. They documented everything, arrival times, invariably before dawn, sometimes as early as 3 hours before the kitchen staff began their day. Departure times after full dark, long after other servants had retired to their quarters. The volume of work she completed in a single day, which exceeded what 2 servants typically accomplished. Her interactions with other servants, which were minimal to non-existent. Most importantly, they noted what she did not do. She never ate proper meals. When the kitchen staff took their morning and midday breaks, gathering around the large table to share food and conversation, Ember continued working. If pressed by the head cook, she might accept a piece of bread, but she ate it while standing, while working, as if the act of sitting and resting would somehow be punished. She never spoke unless spoken to, and even then only in brief responses that ended conversations rather than encouraged them. She never rested, never paused, never showed any sign of fatigue, despite working hours that would exhaust anyone. On the third day of observation, Magnus Greystone volunteered for duty. Garrick had not asked him to participate, but Magnus appeared in the war room where Garrick was collating reports and said simply, "I want to help with the Thornhart situation." Magnus was 58 years old, though hard living and harder losses had aged him beyond his years. His hair had gone iron gray a decade ago, the kind of premature silvering that came from profound stress. His face was weathered, lined deeply around the eyes and mouth, marked by scars both physical and emotional. He had served under Garrick's father for 30 years before transferring his loyalty seamlessly to the son. He was one of the most skilled warriors in the pack, a man who had survived countless battles through a combination of tactical intelligence and ruthless efficiency. He had also lost his only son, Kieran, 10 years ago in a border skirmish. The boy had been 18, newly come into his full strength, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's legacy. He died in his first real engagement, killed by raiders who vanished back across the border before retribution could be mounted. Magnus had found the body 3 days later, partially consumed by scavengers. Something fundamental broke in Magnus after that. He became harder, more demanding in his training methods. Warriors who once respected him began to fear him. His standards rose to heights that seemed designed to ensure failure. His criticism became cutting, designed to wound rather than instruct. For 5 years, he pushed and punished, making training sessions feel like combat, turning young warriors into either excellent fighters or broken men with nothing in between. Then something changed. 3 years ago, around the time of Liana's death, Magnus had abruptly softened. Not weak, but gentler, more patient, as if he had recognized something in himself that he did not like and chosen deliberately to be different. Warriors who trained under him after that shift spoke of him with something approaching affection, rare for any instructor. He still demanded excellence, but he taught rather than terrorized, built up rather than broke down. Now he stood in Garrick's war room, his scarred hands resting on the table covered with observation reports, and said, "I should have seen this years ago. I watched that girl grow up, watched her shrink into herself year by year until she was nearly invisible. I told myself it was not my concern, that Corvus had authority over his own household. I was wrong. Let me help make it right." Garrick studied the old warrior, seeing his own guilt reflected back. "You will observe for the next 3 days. Document everything. But Magnus, you cannot intervene. Not yet. We need enough evidence that even Corvus's closest allies cannot dismiss it." Magnus nodded once, sharp and military. "Understood. I can watch. I am good at watching. I have been watching my own failures for 10 years. The observation reports Magnus submitted were different from the others. Where the younger warriors documented facts, noting arrival times and task completion, Magnus documented behavior with the eye of someone who understood trauma. His reports contained observations like, "She flinches when male servants approach, even those who show no aggression. Her hands shake when holding empty plates, as if she expects them to be struck from her grasp. She positions herself near exits in every room, maintaining lines of retreat even when performing stationary tasks." On the evening of the third day, Magnus came to Garrick's private study unannounced. He looked older than he had 3 days prior, as if the observation duty had drained something vital from him. "The girl moves like a ghost," Magnus said without preamble, "like she is trying to take up no space at all, to be so quiet and small that she ceases to exist. I have seen that before, in soldiers who survived interrogation, in prisoners of war who learned that being noticed meant pain. She has been conditioned, Your Majesty, systematically trained to erase herself." "How long have you known?" Garrick asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Magnus's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his weathered skin. "Known? Never. I never knew with certainty, but I suspected for years. You see things when you live as long as I have. You notice patterns, the way she never looked anyone in the eye. The way she moved through gatherings like smoke, present but not really there. The way Corvus spoke about her in council meetings on the rare occasions her name came up. Always with disappointment. Always with barely concealed contempt. Always with the subtext that she was a burden, a shame, something to be endured rather than celebrated. Why did you say nothing? Because suspicion is not proof, Your Majesty. Because Corvus was beta, second only to your father and then to you in authority. Because his power over his household was absolute, sanctioned by tradition and pack law. Because I told myself that perhaps I was wrong, that perhaps I was seeing shadows where none existed, that perhaps my own grief was making me paranoid. Magnus's voice dropped. Because it was easier to look away than to confront what looking directly might reveal. I chose convenience over courage. I chose my own comfort over her safety. That is something I will carry until I die. The admission hung between them, heavy with the weight of years and accumulated failures. How many others had made the same choice? How many had seen and said nothing because confrontation was difficult and denial was easy? Garrick moved on to witness interviews. He started with Helene Ravenwood, the castle's oldest healer. At 68, she had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings. She knew more secrets than anyone alive. He found her in the healing rooms, organizing herbs with the same methodical precision Ember had shown cleaning the hearth. When he explained why he had come, her weathered face creased with an emotion he could not quite name. Guilt, perhaps, or long-held grief finally given permission to surface. I delivered that girl into this world 24 years ago, Helene said quietly. She did not look at him, keeping her hands busy with her work. I knew her mother, Elara, sweet woman, too gentle for this world perhaps. She loved Corvus desperately, thought she could heal whatever darkness lived in him. When did she die? 15 years ago. Childbirth. The babe, a boy, did not survive either. Helene's fingers stilled on a bundle of dried sage. Corvus took it hard, changed him, or perhaps revealed what had always been there. He became obsessed with strength, with discipline, with forging his daughter into something that could survive where his wife had not. Did you see the marks on Ember, the scars? The silence stretched long enough that Garrick thought she might not answer. Finally, Helene turned to face him, and he saw tears gathering in her ancient eyes. I saw, she whispered. The first time was when she was 10 years old. She came to me with a fever, and when I examined her, I found welts across her back. She told me she had been clumsy during training. I wanted to believe her. I told myself that Corvus was preparing her for a hard world, that discipline was necessary for an Omega's survival. But you knew. I knew. The admission seemed to cost her. I saw her many times over the years. Burns, fractures that healed crooked because she never sought treatment, malnutrition. Each time she had an excuse. Each time I accepted it because the alternative was accusing Beta Corvus of crimes that could tear the pack apart. I chose peace over her safety. That is something I will carry to my grave. Garrick studied the old healer, seeing his own guilt reflected back at him. Can you document what you saw? Dates, injuries, patterns? I kept records. Helene moved to a locked cabinet, retrieving a worn leather journal. I told myself it was for medical purposes, but perhaps I always knew there would come a day of reckoning. The journal contained 15 years of clinical observations, each entry dated, each injury described in precise medical terminology. The pattern was undeniable: regular intervals, systematic placement of wounds, careful avoidance of permanent damage to vital areas. This was not discipline. This was torture refined to an art form. Armed with documentation, Garrick moved to the archives. The castle's record room held centuries of pack history, ceremony logs, council decisions. He spent 3 days reading through dusty volumes, tracing the timeline of Ember's life. He found what he was looking for in the records from 8 years ago. The maturity ceremony, the rite of passage where 16-year-old shifters underwent their first formal transformation before the pack. It was tradition, celebration, proof of control. Ember's entry was brief and clinical. Transformation incomplete. Subject experienced partial shift only, accompanied by severe distress. Ceremony concluded early. Beta Corvus requests authority to provide private instruction and discipline at home to correct deficiency. His father's signature marked the bottom of the page, granting the request. Garrick sat back, understanding settling over him like winter frost. His father had been a good man, a strong leader, But he had trusted Corvus implicitly, never questioning what discipline might entail. And when Garrick inherited the crown 3 years later, grieving and overwhelmed by new responsibilities, he had never thought to review such old cases. He kept reading. A notation in the margins, added later in different handwriting. For ceremony preparation, Beta Corvus requisitioned wolfsbane extract from medical supplies. Purpose noted as potential mercy sedation if transformation became dangerously unstable. Wolfsbane, the herb that suppressed the transformation. In small doses, it could prevent a shifter from changing, keeping them trapped in human form. In larger doses, it was lethal. Corvus had poisoned his own daughter before her maturity ceremony, ensured she would fail, given himself the perfect excuse to isolate her, control her, punish her under the guise of correction. The sickness that rose in Garrick's throat was matched only by his fury. This was not discipline. This was systematic abuse enabled by authority and hidden behind closed doors. And he, along with every other member of pack leadership, had failed to see it. On the 7th day, Garrick called an emergency council session. He summoned all 7 members, his tone making it clear this was not a request. The council chamber filled quickly, curiosity evident on their faces. They had heard he was conducting some kind of investigation. Rumors had spread through the castle like smoke. Beta Corvus took his customary seat to Garrick's right, his expression calm and confident. At 55, he remained a powerful presence. Broad shoulders, silver threading his dark hair, the bearing of a warrior who had proven himself in countless battles. He had saved Garrick's father's life during the border wars 30 years ago. That debt had bought him unquestioned loyalty for decades. The other council members took their seats. Aldrich Silverhand, 62, former general with cold tactical mind. Brenna Stormwatch, 48, ambitious and calculating. Kieran Ashfall, 45, traditionalist who valued order above all. Mira Swiftwater, 40, the most progressive voice. Thaddeus Ironwood, 55, neutral observer. Helena Nightshade, 50, who rarely spoke but watched everything. Garrick stood at the head of the table, Helene's journal and the archive records laid out before him. The leather and furs he wore, traditional vestments of his position, suddenly felt heavier than usual. What he was about to do would shake the foundations of pack leadership. "I have called you here to address a matter of grave concern," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the stone chamber. "A matter that touches on the very foundation of our laws regarding protection of pack members." The council members exchanged glances. Corvus remained perfectly still, though something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, perhaps. 7 days ago, I discovered evidence of systematic abuse against a member of this pack. Abuse that has continued for 15 years, hidden from view, ignored by those who witnessed it. Garrick let the words settle. The victim is Ember Thornheart, daughter of Beta Corvus. The reaction was immediate. Gasps from some, shocked silence from others. Corvus's face remained stone, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair with whitening knuckles. "That is a serious accusation, Your Majesty," Aldrich said carefully. "What evidence supports such a claim?" Garrick opened Helene's journal, reading selected entries aloud. Clinical descriptions of injuries, dates forming a pattern, medical observations that painted a picture of long-term, deliberate harm. He presented the archive records showing Corvus's requisition of wolfsbane before Ember's ceremony. He described his own observations of her scars, her fear responses, her conditioned expectation of violence. "Healer Helene has agreed to testify about what she witnessed over 15 years, Garrick said. "I have statements from servants who saw injuries. I have documentation of supply requisitions that show access to suppressive substances. The pattern is undeniable." "She is clumsy," Corvus said, his voice steady. "Always has been. Falls frequently. I have tried to teach her grace, but she resists instruction." "The marks on her back are from a military training lash," Garrick replied, his voice hardening. "The pattern is unmistakable. Do not insult this council's intelligence by claiming otherwise. Perhaps she requires strict discipline." Kieran spoke reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable. "Some young wolves are more difficult than others. A father has authority." "She is 24 years old," Garrick interrupted. "She has been receiving this discipline since she was 9, when her mother died. At what point does discipline become torture?" The question hung in the air. No one seemed willing to answer. Corvus finally stood, facing Garrick with the confidence of someone who had commanded respect for decades. "My daughter is weak. She has always been weak. Her mother spoiled her, made her soft. When my mate died bringing a son into the world, a son who did not survive, I was left with a daughter who had none of the strength her mother possessed. It became my duty to forge that strength, to make her worthy of the bloodline she carries." "By beating her?" Garrick asked quietly. "By starving her? By poisoning her before her maturity ceremony to ensure she would fail?" Corvus's composure cracked slightly. "I did what was necessary to protect the pack from weakness. Tell me about the wolfsbane you requisitioned before her ceremony." The beta's jaw clenched. "A precaution. If her transformation became unstable, as I suspected it might, I wanted the ability to suppress it before she hurt someone." "So you admit you gave her wolfsbane?" "I admit I took responsible precautions." Corvus's voice rose slightly. "And I was proven correct. She could not complete a basic transformation. She writhed on the ground in front of the entire pack, humiliating herself and our family name. That failure proved she needed stronger measures." "Stronger measures." Garrick repeated the words as if tasting poison. "You ensured she would fail, so you could justify taking her home, isolating her, controlling her completely. You needed that public failure as an excuse for what you had already been doing for 7 years. I did what any father would do when faced with such profound weakness." "No." Garrick's voice went deadly quiet. "Any father would have loved her, would have helped her grow, would have protected her. You are no father. You are someone who used authority as permission to inflict pain." Corvus lunged forward, rage overtaking reason. Guards appeared from the doorway instantly, seizing him before he could reach the Alpha King. He struggled against their grip, his face contorted with fury. "You have grown weak," Corvus snarled as they dragged him back. "Ever since Liana died, you have been weak. You let emotion cloud your judgment. You see a damaged girl with sad eyes, and you forget your duty to the pack." "Take him to the cells," Garrick ordered. "Post guards, no visitors." As the guards hauled Corvus toward the door, he turned back one last time. "This is not over. The pack will never accept you choosing a broken Omega over their Beta. When you realize your mistake, when you see that I was right, it will be too late. You will have destroyed the very authority that keeps us strong." The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off whatever else he might have said. Garrick stood in the sudden silence, feeling the eyes of the council on him. These were the men and women who helped him lead, who advised on matters of war and peace, who shaped the future of their people. And all of them had failed Ember just as completely as he had. "Does anyone else wish to voice objections to my decision?" His voice carried an edge that made it clear this was not actually a question. No one spoke. "Good. We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss formal charges and sentencing. Until then, I want statements from anyone who witnessed Ember's injuries over the years. We will document everything. No more silence, no more looking away." He left the chamber without waiting for formal dismissal. His mind already raced ahead to what came next. Corvus was contained, but Ember did not know that yet. She would have heard that the council was convened, would be waiting in terror for the outcome. He found her exactly where he expected, in the kitchens, scrubbing the same pot over and over with mechanical precision. Her hands were raw from the hot water and harsh soap. She did not look up when he entered, but her shoulders tensed. "Come with me," Garrick said gently. She set down the pot and followed without question, without looking at anyone else in the kitchen. They walked through corridors until they reached a section of the castle she had likely never entered, the residential wing where higher-ranking pack members lived. "These will be your quarters," he said, opening a door to a modest but comfortable room. Real furniture, a window with glass, a hearth with wood already stacked beside it. "You have a lock on the inside. 2 guards will be posted in the hallway at all times, but they are for your protection, not your constraint. No one enters without your permission." Ember stood in the doorway, staring at the room as if it were a trap waiting to spring. "What happened at the council?" "Your father confessed. He admitted to giving you wolfsbane before your ceremony. He is being held in the cells pending formal sentencing." Her legs seemed to give out. She caught herself against the doorframe, breathing hard. "He will kill me. When he gets out, he will kill me." "He will not get out. Not for a very long time." Garrick moved closer, but maintained distance, respecting the invisible boundaries trauma had created. "You are safe now." Safe, she laughed, a broken sound that hurt to hear. You cannot promise that. You cannot protect me from him forever. Eventually, this will fade from your attention. You will have other matters to attend to. And I will still be his daughter, his property, his shame to correct as he sees fit. The resignation in her voice was worse than the fear. She truly believed nothing could change, that this safety was temporary at best, illusory at worst. Garrick crouched so their eyes were level, though she still would not look directly at him. Listen to me carefully. I am Alpha King. What I say becomes law, and I am telling you that you are under my personal protection. You will not return to that house. You will not be alone with your father. You will not be hurt again. Do you understand? Why? The question was barely audible. Why do you care? I am no one. I am the broken daughter of your beta. I have no value to anyone. You are a member of my pack. That gives you value. That gives you protection. He held her gaze, willing her to believe. And what was done to you was wrong. It was evil, and I will not allow it to continue. Tears gathered in her green eyes but did not fall. You cannot promise that. Watch me. For the first time since he had met her, something other than fear crossed her face. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of belief. It was fragile, easily shattered, but it was there. That night, Garrick stood on the battlements watching the eastern sky gradually lighten from black to deep blue to pale gray. Somewhere in the quarters below, Ember was either sleeping or lying awake, probably wondering what fresh hell this intervention would bring her. He suspected the latter. People who lived with constant fear did not rest easily. His wolf paced restlessly inside his mind, unsatisfied with merely containing Corvus. It wanted more complete justice. It wanted to understand why this particular woman's suffering affected him so deeply when he had spent 3 years feeling nothing. He thought about Liana, about the hollow place her death had left. For 3 years, that emptiness had defined him. No interest in potential mates, no desire for connection beyond duty. He had assumed that capacity had died with her in those northern forests. But standing in that kitchen 7 days ago, seeing Ember's blood on the stones where she had been working, he had felt something stir. Not attraction, though he suspected that might come later. Something more fundamental, a recognition that transcended logic or reason. His wolf knew her wolf, even if they had not yet truly met. And that knowing carried weight he could not ignore. Tomorrow would bring formal charges against Corvus, documentation of crimes that spanned 15 years, testimony from witnesses who had stayed silent too long. The council would vote on sentencing, and Garrick would use every ounce of his authority to ensure justice was served. But tonight, he simply stood watch. The Alpha King keeping vigil over a broken girl who did not yet understand that broken things could be made whole, that scars could fade, that safety, real safety, was not an illusion. The first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. A new day beginning. A chance, perhaps, for something better than what had come before. Garrick allowed himself a moment of hope. Then he turned from the battlements and went to begin the work of keeping his promises. The morning after the council's judgment, Ember woke to silence. Not the terrifying silence of waiting for violence, but something stranger and more unsettling. The absence of fear. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at ceiling beams she had never seen before, and realized she did not know what to do with safety. 15 years of surviving had taught her to anticipate pain, to read moods, to make herself small and quiet and invisible. Safety required different skills, ones she had never learned. A knock at the door made her flinch anyway. Old habits died hard. "It's Magnus Greystone," a gruff voice called from the hallway. "The Alpha King sent me. If you're willing, I'd like to talk about training." Ember opened the door cautiously. The man standing there was older than her father, his iron-gray hair pulled back in a warrior's braid, his face lined with the kind of scars that spoke to decades of combat. But his eyes held something different from what she expected. Not pity, which she had learned to hate. Not disgust at her weakness. Something closer to understanding. "I knew your mother," Magnus said without preamble. "Ilara. She was kind to me after I lost my son. I should have been kind to her daughter. I wasn't. I'm here to fix that if you'll let me." The honesty in his voice, the lack of false comfort or empty apologies, made something in Ember's chest loosen slightly. "What kind of training?" The kind that teaches you to fight back, not just with your body, but with your mind. You've been reading combat your whole life, learning to predict violence so you could survive it. I want to teach you how to use that skill, how to turn survival into strength. She studied him for a long moment, looking for the trap. There was always a trap, but his scarred hands hung loose at his sides, unthreatening. His stance was open, vulnerable even. He was giving her the choice, and choices were new territory. "All right," she said finally. "When do we start?" "Now, if you've eaten, and if you haven't, we start with that. Warriors don't skip meals." The training yard Magnus led her to was small and private, tucked behind the castle's eastern wall where casual observers would not wander. Astrid Wolfsbane was already there, stretching with the economical movements of someone who had done this 10,000 times before. "Astrid volunteered to help," Magnus explained. "She's skilled in hand-to-hand combat, and she understands what you've been through. We'll start slow, nothing that pushes beyond what you can handle. But Ember, you need to understand something. This isn't about making you into a perfect warrior overnight. This is about giving you options, about teaching you that when someone raises their hand to you, you can choose how to respond." They started with basics, not fighting stances or strike techniques, but awareness. Magnus had her stand in the center of the yard while he and Astrid moved around her at varying distances. "Tell me where we are," Magnus instructed. "Don't turn your head. Use your peripheral vision. Use sound. Use the feeling of air moving when someone passes close." Ember closed her eyes, forcing herself to rely on senses she had spent years honing for survival. "Astrid is 3 paces behind me, slightly to the left. You're 5 paces to my right, moving closer." "Good. Why am I a threat and Astrid isn't?" The question made her pause. She analyzed the subtle differences, the weight of footsteps, the pattern of breathing, the intention carried in movement. "You're approaching with purpose. Astrid is maintaining position. You're testing. She's observing." "Exactly. You already know this. Your body has been learning it for years. We're just going to make it conscious. Turn it from instinct into skill." They worked for 2 hours that first day. Magnus never touched her without warning. Astrid demonstrated techniques slowly, breaking them down into components that could be understood and replicated. When Ember's hands started shaking from stress, they stopped immediately. No questions asked, no judgment given. On the 3rd day, Garrick joined them. Ember felt his presence before she saw him. That same awareness that had kept her alive for years, now alerting her to the Alpha King's arrival. She tensed automatically, old conditioning screaming that authority meant danger. "Keep working," Garrick said quietly, positioning himself at the edge of the training yard. "I'm just observing. Pretend I'm not here." Impossible, of course. His presence filled the space like gravity, pulling attention even when he stood perfectly still. But Magnus continued the lesson as if nothing had changed, and gradually, Ember found her rhythm again. They were working on reading attack patterns. Magnus would begin a strike sequence, and Ember had to identify the tell, the subtle shift in weight or change in breathing that preceded the actual movement. She got it right more often than wrong, her years of survival training serving her well. "You saw my shoulder dip before I moved," Magnus noted after she dodged a grab attempt. "Good. That's instinct becoming skill. Now let's try it faster." An hour into the session, Garrick spoke from his observation post. "She's reading you before you commit to the movement. Watch her eyes. She's tracking the muscle tension in your shoulders and hips." Magnus paused, studying Ember with new appreciation. "Show me what you see." Ember hesitated, uncomfortable being the focus of attention. But Magnus's expression held only curiosity, no judgment. "Your left shoulder tightens a fraction of a second before you move that direction. Your right hip shifts when you're about to pivot. When you're planning a grab instead of a strike, your fingers flex slightly. Small things, but consistent." "Those are professional-level observations," Garrick said, moving closer. "The kind that take warriors years to learn. You're doing it automatically." "I had to," Ember said simply. "If I couldn't predict what was coming, I couldn't protect myself. Even a second of warning was the difference between bruises and broken bones." The admission hung in the air. Astrid's expression darkened. Magnus's jaw clenched. Garrick went very still, that dangerous stillness that meant his wolf was close to the surface. "Then we use it," Magnus said after a moment, his voice rough. "We take what you learned in hell, and we make it a weapon, your weapon, one that no one can take from you." The training evolved over the following weeks. What started as basic awareness expanded into tactical analysis. Magnus would set up scenarios with 3 or 4 warriors, positioning them around the yard in various formations. Ember's task was to identify the optimal response. Not to fight, not yet, but to think. 4 opponents, Magnus would say. 2 armed with practice swords, 2 unarmed. They're moving to surround you. What do you do? Ember learned to assess quickly. Terrain, escape routes, relative positioning, the strengths and weaknesses of each opponent based on their stance and movement patterns. She developed the habit of speaking her analysis aloud, narrating her tactical thinking. The 2 with swords are overconfident. They're holding the blades too low, assuming I'm unarmed and untrained. The unarmed fighters are the real threat. They're positioned to flank, moving with coordination that suggests training together. I'd break toward the swordsmen, use their overconfidence against them, get inside their guard before they can bring the blades to bear, then use their bodies as shields against the flankers. Why not run? Astrid asked. Because they've blocked the primary exits. Running means turning my back to one pair while fleeing toward the other. Fighting through gives me control of the engagement angle. Garrick, who had taken to attending the morning sessions regularly, nodded slowly. That's tactically sound. You're thinking like a commander, not just a fighter. The observation pleased and terrified her in equal measure. Commanders had authority. Authority meant visibility. Visibility meant vulnerability. But Magnus seemed to sense her discomfort. Command isn't about authority, he said. It's about making decisions when all the options are bad and choosing the least terrible one. You've been doing that your whole life. We're just teaching you to do it with more tools at your disposal. 6 weeks into training, the dynamic shifted again. Garrick began participating directly, not just observing. He would run scenarios with Magnus, the 2 of them coordinating attacks that required Ember to adapt in real time. The first time Garrick came at her in a practice strike, moving with the controlled violence of an experienced warrior, Ember's body locked up. Panic flooded her system. This was an alpha, the ultimate authority moving to hurt her. Every instinct screamed submission. But Garrick stopped immediately, recognizing the freeze response. He stepped back, hands raised, giving her space. "We can stop," he said quietly. "No." Ember forced the word out through clenched teeth. "I need to do this. I need to learn that you're not him." "I'm not," Garrick agreed, "and I never will be, but you set the pace, always." They worked up to it gradually, Garrick moving slowly at first, giving her time to analyze and respond. His fighting style was different from Magnus's, more controlled, more precise. Where Magnus fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who had survived by being tougher and meaner than his opponents, Garrick fought with the cold calculation of someone who had been trained since childhood in strategy and tactics. Ember found she could read him as easily as she read Magnus, maybe more easily. There was a rhythm to how Garrick moved, a pattern that spoke to extensive formal training. She started predicting his movements, calling them out before he executed them. Feint left, strike right, no adjustment, you're going for the grab instead, targeting my shoulder to control my movement. Garrick stopped mid-sequence, something like wonder crossing his features. You saw me change my intention mid-movement. That's not possible unless you're reading micro-expressions I'm not even aware I'm making. You bite your lower lip slightly when you change tactical approach mid-execution, Ember said, and your eyes shift to where you're actually planning to strike before your body commits. Small things, but readable. Magnus laughed, the sound rough but genuine. Garrick, she's got you mapped like a territory. I've been trying to read your tells for 5 years and still can't predict you consistently. She's doing it after 6 weeks. Because she's brilliant, Garrick said simply, and the admiration in his voice made Ember's cheeks heat. We've been underestimating her. Corvus spent 15 years trying to break her, and he succeeded in creating something he never intended. A tactical mind that can analyze combat patterns faster than most trained warriors. The training sessions became the highlight of Ember's days. The structure they provided, the clear objectives, the measurable progress, all of it gave her something she had never had before: purpose beyond survival, growth beyond simply enduring another day. But it was the conversations that happened between drills that mattered most. Magnus talking about his son, about the guilt of pushing too hard after the boy's death, about choosing to change before the bitterness consumed him completely. Astrid sharing stories from the northern campaigns, the things she had seen and done that still haunted her, the way trauma could be survived but never fully left behind. And Garrick, slowly opening up about Lyanna, about the weight of losing her, about the hollow place her death had left, about the 3 years of functioning without feeling, duty without connection. "I thought that part of me died with her," Garrick admitted one morning after a particularly intense training session. They sat on the practice yard wall, all 4 of them, sharing water and the comfortable silence that came after hard physical work. The capacity to care about anything beyond responsibility, to feel something other than obligation. "What changed?" Ember asked. Garrick looked at her directly, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I found someone who reminded me that strength comes in forms I hadn't considered, that survival itself can be an act of defiance, that broken things can be made whole if given the right conditions to heal." The weight of what he wasn't saying hung between them. Astrid and Magnus exchanged glances, then suddenly remembered urgent tasks that required their immediate attention elsewhere, leaving Garrick and Ember alone on the wall. "I don't want you to feel pressured," Garrick said after a moment, "but I need you to know that what I feel for you is more than protectiveness, more than duty. You matter to me, Ember, not as a responsibility, but as a person I admire and care for." Ember's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory. Feelings meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant the possibility of pain, but she had spent weeks watching Garrick, learning to read him as carefully as she read everyone else. And what she saw in him was not the cruelty she had learned to expect from authority. It was steadiness, integrity, a man who kept his promises even when it cost him. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "How to be close to someone without fear. How to trust that today's kindness won't become tomorrow's punishment." "Then we learn together. At whatever pace you need, no expectations, no timeline, just 2 people figuring out how to be more than their wounds." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, breathless from running. "Your Majesty, ambassadors from the Southern Territories have arrived. Alpha Marcellus and his daughter. They request audience." Garrick's expression shifted, becoming the mask of the Alpha King. "Tell them I'll receive them within the hour." He turned back to Ember. "We'll continue this conversation later. But Ember, everything I said stands. I mean it." The council chamber filled quickly for the formal reception. Ember attended at Garrick's request, positioned near the back where she could observe without being the focus of attention. Magnus stood beside her, a quiet presence that felt protective without being suffocating. Alpha Marcellus of the Southern Territories entered with the confident bearing of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. He was perhaps 50, weathered by sun more than combat, with the solid build of someone who worked his own land alongside his people. Beside him walked his daughter Seraphine, and Ember felt an immediate stab of inadequacy. Seraphine Dawnstar was everything Ember was not. Tall, where Ember was slight. Confident where Ember was uncertain. Beautiful in the effortless way of someone who had never been taught to make herself small. She wore fighting leathers that fit like they had been made for her body specifically, weapons displayed openly in the manner of someone who knew how to use them and wanted that skill acknowledged. "Alpha King Garrick," Marcellus said, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a skilled diplomat. "Thank you for receiving us on short notice. I come with a proposal I hope will benefit both our territories." The proposal was presented with formal precision. The Southern Territories offered rich farmland and established trade routes. Their pack was prosperous, but lacked the military strength of the northern kingdoms. A marriage alliance between Garrick and Seraphine would unite their strengths, creating a power block that could resist external threats more effectively. "My daughter is a skilled warrior," Marcellus continued. "She has training in diplomacy and territory management. She would make an excellent Luna for your pack, and the alliance would strengthen both our positions significantly." Seraphine stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice held the clear tones of someone accustomed to being heard. "I will not pretend this is a love match, Your Majesty. We have met perhaps 3 times in our lives, but I respect what you have built here, and I believe I could contribute meaningfully to your leadership. I offer skill, alliance, and a partnership built on mutual benefit." The honesty was refreshing, and Ember could see why such a match would appeal to the council. Brennus especially looked pleased, already calculating the political advantages. Even Aldrich, typically cautious, seemed intrigued by the strategic possibilities. Garrick listened to the full proposal before responding. "I appreciate the directness of your offer, and I acknowledge the benefits such an alliance would bring, but I cannot give you an answer today. This is not a decision to be made lightly or quickly. I ask for time to consider all factors." "Of course," Marcellus agreed easily. "We will remain as your guests for 3 days. That should give you sufficient time to consult with your council and make an informed decision." After the formal reception ended, the council remained to debate. Ember started to leave, assuming she had no place in such discussions, but Garrick gestured for her to stay. "Ember's perspective is valuable," he said to the council. "She sees things others miss." Brennus's expression tightened. He had been cold to Ember since Corvus's exile, though never openly hostile. "With respect, Your Majesty, this is a matter of pack leadership and political alliance. I'm not certain what insight a kitchen servant can provide." "She's not a kitchen servant," Magnus growled from his position near the door. "She's a tactical analyst who reads combat and politics better than most of you. Show some respect." The defense surprised Ember almost as much as it seemed to surprise Brennus. Magnus had become her advocate, without her even realizing it, the same way Astrid had become her protector. She was accumulating allies, people who saw value in her beyond her father's shame. The debate continued for 2 hours. Aldrich presented the military advantages with characteristic thoroughness. The Southern Territories controlled key agricultural regions and trade routes. An alliance would secure their eastern border, allowing them to focus military resources northward, where Theron remained a persistent threat. The economic benefits alone justified serious consideration. Brennus added political dimensions. Several smaller pacts would likely follow the Southern Territories' lead if the alliance was formalized. It would create a coalition strong enough to deter aggression from any direction. But Mira raised concerns about autonomy. "A marriage alliance sounds equal, but historically the stronger pack absorbs the weaker over time. Are we prepared to potentially lose our distinct identity?" "The Southern Territories aren't weak," Thaddeus countered. "They're prosperous. This isn't absorption, it's genuine partnership." Throughout the debate, Garrick remained largely silent, listening to all perspectives. Finally, he turned to Ember. "You've been quiet. What do you see that we're missing?" Ember hesitated, uncomfortable with the attention of the entire council on her. But Garrick's expression held genuine curiosity, not judgment. She forced herself to speak. "Seraphine is impressive. The alliance makes strategic sense, but there's a human element being overlooked." She chose her words carefully. "Seraphine deserves a partner who can love her, not just respect her capabilities. And you deserve the same, Your Majesty. A political marriage might strengthen the pack, but it would weaken you personally. Leadership requires more than tactical advantage. It requires genuine connection, people you trust absolutely because you know their loyalty comes from choice, not obligation." The chamber went silent. Brennus looked ready to object, but Aldrich raised a hand, stopping him. "She makes a valid point," the old general said slowly. "We've been thinking like tacticians. But an alpha's strength comes partly from his Luna. If there's no genuine bond, that strength is hollow. We saw it with your father and mother. Their connection made them both better leaders." Garrick's expression softened as he looked at Ember. "Thank you. That's the perspective I needed." Over the next 2 days, Seraphine proved herself as capable as advertised. She attended training sessions, demonstrating combat skills that impressed even Magnus. She participated in council discussions, offering insights on trade negotiations that showed genuine diplomatic acumen. She was gracious to servants, respectful to warriors, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her worth without needing to diminish others. Ember found herself liking Seraphine despite the jealousy that gnawed at her. This was a woman worthy of Garrick, someone who could stand beside him as an equal. What was Ember in comparison? A broken thing still learning how to function without fear. On the 3rd day, Seraphine sought Ember out privately. She found her in the library, where Ember had taken to spending afternoons studying pack law and history, trying to understand the political structures she had been invisible to for so long. "May I join you?" Seraphine asked, and when Ember nodded, settled into the chair across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Seraphine said simply, "He's in love with you." Ember's head snapped up. "What? Garrick, he's in love with you. It's obvious to anyone paying attention." Seraphine's smile held no malice, only amused resignation. "The way he watches you when he thinks no one is looking, the way he positions himself between you and potential threats without even realizing he's doing it, the way he lights up when you speak. I've seen arranged marriages built on less foundation than what exists between you two already." I'm nobody, Ember whispered. I'm the daughter of a disgraced beta. I have no training, no status, no value to offer. That's what you were taught to believe. It's not truth. Seraphine leaned forward. I've watched you this week. You analyze tactical situations faster than trained warriors. You understand political dynamics intuitively. You have the respect of Magnus Greystone, which is not easily earned. And you have something I don't. You have Garrick's heart. The alliance would benefit the pack. Perhaps. But alliances can be built on foundations other than marriage. My father and I discussed it this morning. We're going to propose a military and trade partnership without the marriage component. Equal allies, not subordinates bound by a political union, neither party genuinely wants. Why would you do that? Seraphine's expression turned serious. Because I've survived my own trauma. Different from yours, but real nonetheless. I spent 3 years in a war camp after my territory was overrun. I learned what it means to fight for survival against impossible odds. I recognize that strength in you, and I refuse to stand in the way of two people who have found genuine connection in a world that tried to destroy them both. That evening, the formal announcement came. Seraphine and her father proposed a 10-year mutual defense treaty and trade agreement. No marriage, no absorption of one pack into another. Simply cooperation between equals who recognized shared interests. The council, surprised but pragmatic, accepted. Brennus looked disappointed but did not argue. The strategic benefits remained even without the marriage component, and Seraphine's diplomacy had positioned the proposal as strengthening rather than weakening the existing power structure. After the formalities concluded, Garrick found Ember on the battlements where she had taken to spending evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains. Seraphine spoke with you, he said. It wasn't a question. She's remarkable. You could have been happy with her. Could have been. Garrick moved to stand beside her, close, but not touching. But happiness built on pragmatism is not the same as happiness built on genuine connection. I was married once before for political reasons. Liana and I learned to love each other, and I'm grateful for the time we had. But I'm older now. I understand more about what I need. And what I need is someone who challenges me, who sees the world from angles I miss, who makes me want to be better than I am. He turned to face her fully. I need you, Ember. Not because you're convenient or strategic, because you matter. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it. But only if that's what you want, only if you choose it freely. Ember looked at him, this man who had saved her and then taught her to save herself, who had been patient when she expected violence, who looked at her like she was something precious rather than something broken. The fear was still there, old conditioning that whispered warnings about trust and vulnerability. But beneath it, something else had grown, something that felt like hope. I want to try, she said. I'm terrified. I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. Garrick's smile was like sunrise. Then we'll learn together. The moment of peace lasted exactly 3 more days. The attack came at dawn, precisely calculated to catch the castle at its most vulnerable. Guards were changing shifts. Warriors were at breakfast. The systematic planning bore Theron Blackridge's signature, the same methodical approach that had killed Liana 3 years ago. Ember was in the training yard with Magnus when the alarm horn sounded. 3 sharp blasts, enemy contact, eastern border, multiple hostiles. How many? Magnus barked at the messenger who appeared seconds later. 20 confirmed, maybe more. They hit the supply depot at first light, killed 3 guards, took a prisoner. Garrick appeared already armed and armored. Council to the war room, now. Magnus, get Ember somewhere secure. No? Ember surprised herself with the firmness of her voice. I can help. This is not training, Garrick said, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is real combat. I know. That's why you need me. I've been studying patrol patterns and border reports for weeks. I can predict where they'll strike next. Magnus looked between them, then said quietly, She's better at pattern recognition than anyone we have. At least let her contribute to the planning. The war room filled within minutes. Aldrich spread maps across the table, marking confirmed enemy positions. The situation looked bad. Theron's forces had hit the eastern supply depot hard, taking it completely by surprise. 3 warriors dead, 1 captured, significant supplies destroyed. He wants us to respond in force, Aldrich said, his tactical mind already working the problem. Draw our warriors east while he hits somewhere else. Where? Brennus demanded. We have 3 major positions that could be targets. We can't defend them all at full strength. Ember studied the map, her mind racing through patterns she had internalized over weeks of observation. Theron's previous raids, the timing, the targets, the forces deployed. There was a rhythm to his attacks, a signature that spoke to underlying strategy. "He won't hit the major positions," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "He's testing us, probing for weaknesses." The supply depot was valuable but not critical, easy to rebuild. He wants to see how we respond tactically, whether we're predictable. "Go on," Garrick encouraged. His real target is the Eastern Patrol route, specifically the section that passes through the narrow canyon. If he hits you there while you're responding to the supply depot, he can do significant damage with a small force. Terrain advantage, limited escape routes, classic ambush positioning. Aldrich studied the map with new eyes. She's right. The canyon is perfect ambush terrain. We always avoid it because of that vulnerability. But if we're rushing to the depot, we take the fastest route, Garrick finished, which goes straight through the canyon. Theron knows our protocols. He knows we'll want to respond quickly to rescue our captured warrior. "So what do we do?" Mira asked. Ember looked at Garrick. "You take 7 warriors north through the expected route. Make it look like you're rushing to engage his main force. But you're actually the bait. I take a small team, 4 warriors, to the eastern supply route. If I'm right about his secondary target, we'll be in position to counter-ambush. If I'm wrong, minimal force is lost." "Absolutely not," Garrick said immediately. "You're not going into combat. You need me in the field. My tactical assessment is better used there than here. And if something happens to you in that canyon, someone needs to survive who understands Theron's strategy." Magnus cleared his throat. "She's not wrong about the tactical assessment, and we do need flexible response teams. But Garrick, you should lead the eastern team. Let someone else take the northern route." "Theron will expect me personally," Garrick countered. "He's baiting me specifically. This is about Liana, about settling old grudges. If I don't show up where he expects, he'll know we saw through his plan." The debate continued for precious minutes. Finally, Aldrich cut through with the cold pragmatism of a career soldier. "We're wasting time. Ember's analysis is sound. We split forces. Garrick north with 6 warriors. Ember east with 4, including Magnus. I stay here to coordinate defenses in case this is a triple feint and the real target is the castle itself." "I'm going east," Garrick said flatly. "And confirm Ember's analysis is wrong?" Magnus shook his head. "You taught me to trust my tactical advisors, Garrick. Start taking your own advice. She's brilliant at this. Let her prove it." The decision was made more by necessity than consensus. They had minutes to deploy before Theron's timing advantage became insurmountable. Garrick pulled Ember aside while warriors armed themselves. "You see the trap and you pull back," he said, his hands gripping her shoulders. "You do not engage unless you have overwhelming advantage. You do not take unnecessary risks. You survive. That's an order." "Same to you," Ember replied. "Survive, come back to me." Something passed between them then, unspoken but profound, a promise made without words. Then Garrick was gone, leading his team north at a run, and Ember was left with Magnus and 3 other warriors whose names she barely knew. The eastern route was exactly where she predicted it would be critical. They reached the supply route as Theron's secondary force was positioning for their own ambush, expecting the patrol that usually came through at mid-morning. 5 warriors, all experienced, all positioned for maximum impact. "We're outmatched," one of Ember's warriors whispered. "Not if we're smarter," Ember replied. She studied the terrain with the analytical precision Magnus had drilled into her. They're positioned for an ambush from above. They expect targets in the canyon below. We come from behind, use the high ground they've already claimed, fast strike, eliminate their advantage, then retreat before they can coordinate a response. "That's insane," another warrior said. "We don't have the numbers." "We have surprise," Magnus countered. "And we have terrain they gave us by taking the obvious position. It's tactically sound." The engagement lasted 90 seconds. Ember had never fought in actual combat before, only training exercises with known outcomes and controlled violence. This was different. This was chaos and blood and the screaming reality of mortality. But her mind stayed clear, analyzing even as her body moved through drills Magnus had taught her. She saw the moment it would go wrong. Saw one of Theron's warriors recover faster than predicted. Saw him turning toward Magnus, who was engaged with 2 others. Saw the killing angle, the exposed flank, the inevitable end. Something fundamental broke loose inside her. Not fear or rage, pure protective instinct. Her wolf, dormant for so long, surged forward with desperate strength. The transformation was nothing like the agonized failure of her maturity ceremony. This was clean, natural, right. Her bones shifted and reformed with precise efficiency. Her senses exploded into overwhelming clarity. She felt her human consciousness merge perfectly with her wolf's instinct, two halves of one whole, finally united. The wolf that emerged was smaller than the males around her, but faster. Her dark fur marked with distinctive silver along her flanks like lightning strikes frozen in place. She hit the warrior, threatening Magnus at full speed, momentum and surprise compensating for size difference. Her jaws found his throat before he even registered her presence. The rest of Theron's team scattered, unprepared for an additional combatant, especially one capable of full transformation in the middle of active combat. Ember's team pressed the advantage. 2 enemies down, 3 fleeing. Victory. Magnus shifted back to human form, bleeding from a shoulder wound but alive. You transformed, fully, in the middle of combat. Ember shifted back with the same ease, surprised by how natural it felt. I had to. You were in danger. That's control most warriors don't develop for years. Magnus was grinning despite the blood. You just proved you're not defective. Never were. Corvus's poison was the only thing holding you back. They secured the position and sent a runner to update Aldrich while tending Magnus's wound. The northern team returned an hour later, victorious but bloodied. Garrick had been right about the ambush in the canyon. Theron had been waiting with his best warriors. But Ember had been right about the secondary target. By splitting forces and positioning intelligently, they had turned Theron's strategy against him. Minimal casualties, strategic victory. Garrick found her as soon as he returned, still covered in blood, his eyes wild until he confirmed she was unharmed. You transformed. I did. Magnus said it was complete, full control. It felt right, like something locked finally opened. Garrick pulled her into an embrace that ignored protocol and propriety. You saved lives today. Proved yourself as a tactician. Showed the pack you're not what Corvus claimed. You understand what this means? Ember understood. It meant visibility. Recognition, the end of invisibility she had survived behind for so long. It terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. That evening, Aldrich called an emergency council session. Theron's attacks were escalating. The pack needed strong, unified leadership, and traditionally, that meant a confirmed Luna standing beside the Alpha King. Ember has proven her tactical value, Aldrich said, but the pack will question her readiness for Luna. There are concerns about her training, her background, the circumstances of Corvus's exile. Then we address those concerns formally, Garrick said, through the traditional trials. The trials, ancient tradition, rarely invoked in modern times. 3 tests designed to evaluate fitness for Luna: wisdom, strength, and heart. Pass all 3, and no one could question her right to stand beside the Alpha King. Fail any single one, and Garrick would be required to choose a new candidate within the month or face a council vote of no confidence. The trials have not been conducted in 50 years, Brennus said carefully. Are you certain this is necessary? I'm certain it's fair, Garrick replied. Ember will be judged by the same standards as any candidate, and when she passes, no one can claim nepotism or favoritism. She will have earned her position by merit alone. Aldrich consulted the ancient texts, his weathered fingers tracing ritual requirements. Tradition dictates the final trial must occur under the full moon, as the bond between Luna and Pack is strongest when witnessed by Moon's blessing. The next full moon rises in 3 days. All 3 trials must be completed before then. Ember felt the weight of the decision settle on her shoulders. This was her choice. She could refuse, remain in the background, stay safe in invisibility. Or she could step forward, claim her space, prove that what Corvus had done to her did not define what she could become. She thought about Magnus teaching her that strength was choice, about Seraphine stepping aside because she recognized genuine connection, about Garrick offering partnership built on respect rather than obligation. I accept, she said clearly. I will undergo the trials. The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Ember barely heard it. She was too busy looking at Garrick, seeing the pride and fear and absolute faith in his expression. He believed in her. It was time she started believing in herself. The trials would begin in 3 days. Until then, she had work to do. Studying pack law with Helene, who taught her the intricate balance of tradition and adaptation that governed their society. training with Magnus and Astrid, who pushed her body while protecting her spirit, planning strategic scenarios with Aldrich, learning to think 3 moves ahead in the complex chess game of pack politics, learning to navigate council dynamics from Mira, understanding that leadership meant building coalitions, finding common ground even with those who started as opponents. She was building the foundation of knowledge and skill that would let her prove, once and for all, that she was not the broken thing Corvus had tried to create, not defective, not weak, not shameful. She was exactly what she had always been underneath the layers of abuse and conditioning. Strong, resilient, capable of growth and transformation that went far beyond the physical shift from human to wolf. She was forged in fire and emerging as steel, and in 3 days she would prove it to everyone, including herself. The morning of the first trial dawned cold and clear, the kind of crystalline winter day where sounds carried further than they should, and breath hung visible in the air like small ghosts. Ember stood before the great hall's mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. She wore formal attire provided by the castle seamstresses, deep forest green that brought out her eyes, leather accents at the shoulders and waist in the warrior tradition. The dress had been designed specifically to show her scars rather than hide them. A statement, a reminder that strength could be built from suffering if you chose growth over bitterness. Magnus found her there, his weathered face creased with something that might have been fatherly concern if either of them had known what that looked like without complications. "Your mother would be proud," he said quietly. "Alara always believed in choosing kindness, even when the world gave her reasons for cruelty. You have her heart, but you also have steel she never got the chance to forge. That combination makes you formidable." Ember turned from the mirror. "What if I fail? What if Corvus was right about me all along?" "Then you fail and we find another path forward. But Ember, I have trained warriors for 40 years. I have seen thousands of people face tests of their capability and character. You are one of the finest tactical minds I have ever encountered. You are compassionate without being weak, analytical without being cold. You will not fail today. You might struggle, you might doubt, but you will not fail." The great hall filled quickly with pack members summoned to witness the trials. This was not just about Ember's fitness for Luna. It was about whether the pack could move beyond bloodline and tradition, whether they could see worth in someone who had been invisible for so long. Hundreds of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. And in the front row, Garrick, his gray eyes holding hers with absolute faith. The council assembled on the raised platform, all 7 members present in formal vestments. Aldrich stepped forward as primary officiant, his aged voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "We gather today to witness the trials of Provation, ancient tradition rarely invoked, but no less binding for its infrequency. Ember Thornheart, daughter of the former Beta Corvus, has petitioned to be recognized as candidate for Luna. She will undergo 3 trials: wisdom, strength, and heart. These trials are not competitions, they are evaluations. Pass all 3, and she will be acknowledged as worthy. Fail anyone, and the candidacy ends." He paused, letting the weight settle. "The first trial begins now. Trial of wisdom, evaluation of judgment under pressure." 2 families were brought forward, and Ember recognized them from her research. Gideon Stonebrook, a farmer in his 60s, weathered by decades of hard labor. 3 generations of his family had worked the same land, passed down through careful stewardship and traditional knowledge. Beside him stood Petra Ashford, younger by 20 years, her hands equally work-worn, but in different ways. Refugee from territorial conflicts in the South, arrived 5 years ago with 5 children under 10 and nothing but determination. Aldrich explained the situation with clinical precision. These families dispute hunting rights in the eastern forest, specifically the territory between their properties. Both have legitimate historical claims. Both have genuine need. Previous mediation has failed. Escalation has occurred, including violence between the younger members. As candidate Luna, you must resolve this dispute in a manner that serves both pack law and pack welfare. Ember stepped forward, her mind already analyzing the layers beneath the surface dispute. Gideon spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and accumulated grievance. "My family has hunted those woods for 80 years. My grandfather marked the boundaries. My father maintained them. I have honored them. Then refugees arrive and claim what was never theirs. We welcomed them. We shared what we could. But they take and take, showing no respect for established order. My grandson was injured defending our rights. That injury demands justice. Petra's response came sharp and immediate. Your grandson started that fight. My son was hunting legally in unclaimed forest when he was attacked. We are not thieves. We are survivors trying to feed our children in a land that gives us nothing freely. You have resources, connections, established crops. We have only what we can hunt. You would deny us even that because we do not have the right ancestors. The fundamental tension was clear: tradition versus necessity, established rights versus survival needs. Both had valid points. Both had suffered. Both believed absolutely in the justice of their position. Ember asked for privacy, to interview each family separately. In a small side chamber, away from the observing crowd, she questioned Gideon with the thoroughness Magnus had taught her. Tell me about the specific incident that injured your grandson. Gideon's expression darkened. The Ashford boy, Marcus, age 17. He was in our section of the forest with a bow. My grandson Thomas confronted him. Words were exchanged. It became physical. Thomas took an arrow to the shoulder, nearly lost the arm. Was Thomas alone when he confronted Marcus? A hesitation. He had 2 friends with him. So 3 against 1, and the injury came from an arrow. Was Marcus threatening them with the weapon before the confrontation began? He was hunting. Of course he had his bow ready. But not drawn on your grandson until after 3 young men surrounded him? Ember kept her voice neutral, gathering facts without judgment. What animals was Marcus hunting when this occurred? Rabbits, he claimed. Did you find evidence of rabbits in that area? Tracks, droppings, warren systems? Gideon shifted uncomfortably. The forest is full of rabbits. Ember made mental notes. The incident was more complex than the initial presentation suggested. She moved to interview Petra separately. Tell me about Marcus. Not about the incident, but about him as a person. Petra's defensive posture softened slightly. He is a good boy. Serious. Responsible beyond his years because he had to be. He helps care for his younger siblings. He learned to hunt from necessity, not sport. He has never wasted a kill, never taken more than we need. The day of the incident, why was he hunting in that particular section of forest? Because the area closer to our property has been hunted out. We have 5 children to feed, candidate Luna. We cannot afford to observe boundaries that leave us starving while others prosper. Would Marcus have shot Thomas if not threatened? Petra met her eyes directly. My son is not violent, but he will defend himself. 3 against 1. What would you have expected him to do? After interviewing both families separately, Ember spent an hour studying maps of the disputed territory, examining hunting records, reviewing previous mediation attempts. The pattern became clear. This was not actually about the forest. It was about scarcity and fear and the very human tendency to protect what you have against perceived threats. When she returned to the Great Hall, she asked for detailed reports on game populations in the disputed territory. A pack surveyor provided numbers that confirmed what Ember had suspected. The forest could not sustainably support both families' hunting needs without managed intervention. The root problem is not access, Ember announced to the assembled pack. It is capacity. The forest you are fighting over cannot support the hunting pressure you are placing on it. Even if one family had exclusive rights, the game population would collapse within 2 seasons. You are not enemies. You are both victims of an unsustainable situation. She turned to address the council and the watching pack members. I propose a multi-part solution. First, regarding the immediate dispute, the eastern forest will be designated as shared territory with seasonal rotation. Gideon's family has autumn and winter hunting rights, when game is most plentiful and meat can be preserved. Petra's family has spring and summer rights, when fresh meat is needed but storage is difficult. Both families are required to participate in forest management, including predator control and habitat improvement. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gideon looked ready to object, but Ember continued before he could speak. Second, we address the underlying scarcity. Pack resources will subsidize agricultural expansion for both families. Gideon, your family has knowledge of traditional farming. Petra, your family has labor capacity and willingness to learn. You will work together. Gideon teaches sustainable agriculture. Petra's family provides workers. Crops are shared proportionally based on land and labor contribution. This reduces hunting dependency for both families. Third, regarding the violence between Marcus and Thomas. Both young men will work together on a forest restoration project. They will spend the next 3 months clearing invasive species, improving game habitat, and learning that cooperation serves both families better than conflict. This is restorative justice, not punitive. They fix what was broken, including their relationship. Finally, this dispute revealed a gap in our pack systems. We have no formal process for resource conflicts. I propose establishing a mediation council specifically for such disputes, with representation from established families and newer arrivals. Future conflicts are addressed before they escalate to violence. Silence filled the great hall. Then Aldrich nodded slowly. This solution addresses immediate grievances while preventing future conflicts. It honors tradition without being enslaved by it. It transforms enemies into partners. He looked at the other council members. Does anyone dispute that this demonstrates Luna-level wisdom? No one spoke. Even Brennus, who had been skeptical of Ember's candidacy, looked grudgingly impressed. The first trial is passed, Aldrich declared. Gideon and Petra both looked uncertain, not quite satisfied, but unable to articulate why the solution was unfair, which, Ember understood, was exactly the point. Good mediation did not make everyone happy. It made everyone equally uncomfortable while moving towards something better than continued conflict. Garrick caught her eye from the front row, his expression communicating pride and something warmer. She had proven she could think systematically, balance competing interests, see root causes beneath surface symptoms. One trial passed, 2 remained. The second trial commenced the following morning, designed to test strength and capability under pressure. But the scenario presented was not what Ember expected. A child had gone missing. 7-year-old Lily Whitecrest, deaf since birth, had wandered from her family's home near the forest edge 8 hours ago. 6 search parties comprising 30 warriors had found nothing. A winter storm was approaching, expected to arrive in 4 hours. If the child was not found before the storm hit, she would not survive the night. "You have command of 6 warriors," Aldrich announced. "You have 4 hours before conditions become too dangerous to continue searching. Find the child and bring her home safely." The 6 warriors assembled before Ember represented a calculated test of her leadership capability. 2 were veterans who had trained with Magnus and respected her analytical skills. 2 were younger warriors who had never worked with her and clearly doubted that someone so recently removed from kitchen service could command them effectively. 2 were neutral, waiting to see proof before forming opinions. Ember studied them for a moment, recognizing the political dimension of the selection. This was not just about finding a lost child. It was about whether she could lead warriors who did not automatically respect her authority. She began with questions, her tactical mind seeking information before making decisions. Who has experience tracking children specifically? Not just general tracking, but understanding how lost children think and move? One of the neutral warriors, a woman named Kira, raised her hand. "I have 3 children of my own. I have found them when they wandered more times than I can count." "Good. You are second in command. Your expertise in child behavior supersedes my tactical training." Ember turned to the skeptical younger warriors. "Who among you is the fastest runner?" A male warrior named Rolf answered somewhat sullenly. "I am." "Then you are our messenger. When we find her, you will need to run back to alert the healers and guide the rescue team to our location. Speed saves lives. That makes you critical to success." Ember watched his posture shift slightly, skepticism giving way to recognition that his role mattered. She organized them quickly, assigning roles that played to individual strengths while building team cohesion. Then she turned to the actual search problem with the systematic analysis Magnus had drilled into her. Previous search parties covered the obvious areas. They found nothing. That tells us something important. Lily either moved farther than expected, or she went somewhere the standard search patterns missed. Ember studied the map, her mind overlaying terrain with probable child behavior. "Kira, how do deaf children navigate unfamiliar territory?" "Vision becomes primary. They follow things they can see. Water features especially. Streams, because the visual flow is interesting and consistent." "The Eastern Stream," Ember said, pointing to the map. "It runs through a section of forest that standard patrols avoid because the undergrowth is too dense for easy passage. Adult logic says no one would go there voluntarily, but a child following water would not think about undergrowth density. She would think about where the water goes." One of the veteran warriors, Marcus, the same man who had fought beside her during Theron's ambush, nodded agreement. "It makes sense, but that area is nearly impassable. It will slow us down significantly." "We split," Ember decided. "3 of us follow the stream through the dense undergrowth. 3 of you continue the standard search pattern in case I am wrong. This minimizes risk while maximizing coverage. Magnus volunteers to come with me into the difficult terrain." Magnus had appeared at the edge of the group, his leg still bandaged from the ambush wound, but his expression determined. "You will need someone with experience in difficult extractions, and someone the child might recognize if she has seen warriors in the castle." The storm arrived early, not in 4 hours as predicted, but in 90 minutes. The temperature dropped with frightening speed, and snow began falling in thick, blinding sheets. Ember faced a decision that would define her leadership capability. Continue searching in increasingly dangerous conditions, or retreat to safety and abandon the child to the storm. "We split again," she announced. 4 warriors return to the castle. Guide rescue teams to our last known position. 3 of us continue. Marcus, Kira, Magnus. If we are not back in 3 hours, assume we have found shelter and will wait out the storm. The 4 departing warriors looked relieved. The 3 staying looked grim but determined. This was the burden of command. Making the call that put lives at risk, including your own because the alternative was unacceptable. They found Lily 40 minutes later, hypothermic and unconscious, huddled beneath a fallen log near the stream exactly where Ember had predicted. But they were not alone in the forest. A pack of wolves, the animal kind, not shifters, had caught the scent of vulnerable prey. 6 of them, lean and hungry from the hard winter, circling the fallen log with the patient inevitability of predators who knew their target could not escape. "We need to get to her before they do," Kira whispered. "We cannot fight 6 wolves and protect an unconscious child," Marcus countered. "We need to drive them off first." "No time," Ember said, her mind racing through tactical options with the speed that made Magnus proud. "They will scatter if we approach aggressively, but they will come back as soon as we are occupied with the child. We need to make them believe the area is not worth the risk." She shifted partially, letting her claws extend and her canines lengthen. The other 3 followed her lead. Then she began making noise, not the sounds of prey, but of a much larger predator pack claiming territory. Howls that echoed through the storm, aggressive posturing, the 4 of them moving in coordinated patterns that suggested greater numbers. The wolves hesitated. Ember pressed the advantage, shifting fully now, her silver-marked fur standing out against the snow. She did not attack. She threatened. Positioned herself between the wolves and the child, making it clear that reaching the prey meant going through defenders who would make the cost too high. 3 of the wolves broke first, melting back into the forest. The remaining 3 held position longer, hungry enough to consider the risk. Ember growled, the sound carrying absolute territorial claim. Magnus and the others added their voices, a chorus of threat that finally convinced the last wolves to retreat. They had minutes before hypothermia became irreversible. Marcus made a fire with practiced efficiency despite the wind and snow. Kira wrapped Lily in every spare piece of clothing they carried. Ember gave up her own cloak, the one Garrick had commissioned for her, using it to create an insulated cocoon around the child. Magnus's wound had reopened during the confrontation, blood staining his bandages. He was limping badly but refused to slow down. Together, they created a shelter using the fallen log, branches, and anything else they could gather quickly. Not comfortable, but enough to maintain warmth until the storm passed or rescue arrived. Lily regained consciousness after 30 minutes of careful warming. Her eyes widened with fear when she saw strangers surrounding her, but Kira knew basic sign language and managed to communicate safety. The child relaxed slightly, though she shivered violently. They waded through the storm together, 4 adults and 1 child huddled in an improvised shelter while wind howled overhead. Ember used the time to keep Lily calm, using hand gestures and facial expressions to communicate when sign language failed. She told stories through pantomime, making the child smile despite the cold and fear. The rescue team found them 3 hours later, guided by Rolf, who had remembered the exact position and led them through the storm with impressive determination. Lily was taken immediately to the healers, her prognosis good thanks to the rapid intervention. Back at the castle, Magnus's wound required fresh treatment, but he waved off concern. "The girl is safe. That is what matters. Everything else is just discomfort. The council convened that evening to evaluate the second trial. Aldrich presented the facts without embellishment. Ember had made correct tactical predictions. She had led warriors who initially doubted her. She had made the difficult decision to continue searching when others chose safety. She had protected the child without unnecessary violence. She had kept everyone alive, including herself. The trial of strength tests capability under pressure, Aldrich said. Crisis management, protection of the vulnerable, leadership when the stakes are absolute. Does anyone dispute that Ember demonstrated Luna-level strength? Brennus looked like he wanted to object, but could not find grounds. The evidence was overwhelming. The trial is past, he admitted. 2 trials complete. 1 remained. And the final trial, the trial of heart, would be the most difficult because it required Ember to confront not external challenges but internal demons. The 3rd trial was scheduled for the following evening, during the full moon as tradition required. Ember spent the day in preparation, though she did not know exactly what the trial would entail. Aldrich had been deliberately vague, saying only that she would face a test of moral character when personal cost was high. She trained with Magnus in the morning, pushing her body to exhaustion so her mind would have no energy for anxiety. She studied with Helene in the afternoon, reviewing pack law and historical precedents for difficult ethical decisions. She spent the evening with Garrick, not discussing the trial, but simply being present with someone who believed in her absolutely. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Garrick said as they sat together watching the sunset, "I want you to know that you have already proven yourself to me and to anyone who matters. The trial is a formality. You are already Luna in everything but title." "Then why do I feel like everything depends on this?" "Because you care. Because you want to earn it, not just receive it as a gift. That caring is what makes you worthy." The council chamber was packed when Ember arrived the next evening. Every pack member who could fit had squeezed in, standing room only, all of them wanting to witness the final trial. The atmosphere felt different from the previous 2. Anticipation mixed with something darker. Dread, perhaps, as if everyone knew this trial would cut deeper than tests of wisdom or strength. Aldrich stood to address the assembly, but before he could speak, the great doors burst open. Guards entered, dragging a prisoner between them, bound and bloodied but still defiant. Corvus Thornhart. The shock rippled through the crowd like a physical wave. Corvus had been exiled, sent beyond the northern mountains with orders never to return on pain of death. Yet here he was, captured at the border attempting to enter pack territory. "He was intercepted 3 days ago," Aldrich explained, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. He claimed to carry intelligence about Theron Blackridge's plans, information critical to pack security. We have held him while debating what to do with a condemned exile who violated the terms of his banishment. Ember felt her hands begin to shake. She clasped them together tightly, willing them to be still. This was the trial. Not some abstract ethical dilemma, but the most personal confrontation possible. Her father, the source of 15 years of trauma, placed before her for judgment. "The trial of heart," Aldrich continued, "requires you to make a decision that balances justice, mercy, and pack welfare when all 3 conflict. Corvus Thornhart stands before you guilty of violating exile. The penalty is death. However, he claims to possess intelligence that could save lives. You must decide his fate." The chamber went absolutely silent. Ember could feel hundreds of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would choose vengeance or pragmatism, personal justice or pack welfare. She forced herself to look at Corvus directly for the first time since his exile. He looked older. The silver in his hair had spread, and new lines creased his face. But his eyes held the same cold contempt she remembered. When he spoke, his voice carried acid. "So the pack places its fate in the hands of a defective Omega who could not even manage a basic transformation. This is what you have become? This is the leadership you trust? A broken girl playing at strength?" "Silence!" Garrick commanded, his alpha authority making the word a physical force. But Corvus ignored him, focusing entirely on Ember. "I made you strong," Corvus continued. "Everything you are, every skill you possess, exists because I forced you to develop them. You survived because I taught you how to survive. And this is how you repay that lesson? By destroying my position, my honor, my legacy?" Ember found her voice, and it came out steadier than she expected. "You taught me tactics while you broke my bones. You gave me tools for analysis while you poisoned me. You are right that I learned from you, but I learned in spite of you, not because of you. I learned that I could survive anything if I chose to survive. That strength comes from choice, not from force. She turned to address Aldrich and the council. Before I make any decision about his fate, I need to know what intelligence he claims to possess and whether it has been verified. Aldrich nodded to one of the guards, who presented a leather satchel. Inside were maps marked with troop movements, detailed notes about Theron's strategic planning, and correspondence that outlined a coordinated assault planned for the new moon, 3 weeks away. "We have verified as much as possible," Aldrich said. "The intelligence appears genuine. It details a 3-pronged attack designed to overwhelm our defenses. With this information, we can prepare. Without it, we would be fighting blind." "How did he obtain this intelligence?" Ember asked. Corvus answered before anyone else could. "I still have contacts, warriors who served under me who believe my exile was unjust. They passed information knowing I would bring it to where it could be used." "And you expect what in return, pardon? Restoration of rank?" "I expect nothing from a pack led by weakness. But I refuse to let Theron Blackridge destroy everything I helped build. My loyalty was always to the pack itself, not to any individual alpha. I bring this intelligence because it serves pack survival, which is the only thing that has ever mattered." The admission was revealing. Corvus genuinely believed his abuse had been justified as preparation for a hard world. His twisted logic equated cruelty with care, pain with pedagogy. He would never see what he had done as wrong because in his mind, pack survival justified any methods. Ember studied her father, this man who had shaped her through suffering, and felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not even pity, but understanding. He was a man broken by grief who had spent 15 years trying to prevent more loss by controlling everything, including his daughter. That did not excuse what he had done, but it explained it in ways that made him human rather than monstrous. She turned to address the council and assembled pack. "I have a decision. It requires me to explain my reasoning, so please permit me to speak at length." Aldrich gestured permission. Ember took a breath and began. "My father is guilty of violating exile. The law is clear. The penalty is death. He knew this when he chose to return. However, he brings intelligence that could save dozens of lives during Theron's planned assault. These two facts create an impossible choice if we think in simple terms of punishment versus pragmatism. But Luna is not a position that permits simple thinking. Luna requires seeing complexity, holding multiple truths simultaneously, finding paths forward that honor justice without sacrificing mercy or wisdom." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "My father claims he taught me strength. He is partially correct. He taught me to survive, but survival is not the same as strength. Strength is what you do with survival, how you transform pain into purpose, trauma into growth, suffering into wisdom. I could execute him and call it justice. His crimes merit death many times over, but execution solves nothing except removing a problem. It does not heal. It does not restore. It does not make us better than we were. I could pardon him completely in exchange for intelligence. That would be pragmatic but hollow. It would send the message that crimes can be forgiven if you provide sufficient value afterward. That authority can be excused if you serve pack interests. That is not the precedent we want to establish. So I choose a third path, one that honors all the competing values at stake." Ember looked directly at Corvus. "You will provide your intelligence fully and completely, with no conditions and no expectations of reward. This is not negotiation. This is the price of continued life. You violated exile. You earned death. I am offering you the chance to make your final acts serve the pack you claim to love more than you loved your daughter. Once you have provided all intelligence and answered every tactical question our strategists require, you will be exiled again. Not for 5 years, permanently. Beyond the eastern wastes, where no pack will shelter you. You will live, but you will live alone, which I suspect is a fate you fear more than death. Additionally, you will undergo counseling with healer Helene, not to excuse what you did or to seek your redemption, which you do not deserve, but to document your methods and motivations. That documentation will be used to train future pack members to recognize abuse, to identify patterns of control, to prevent others from suffering what I suffered. Your cruelty will become a teaching tool. Your abuse will be transformed into protection for others. You wanted to forge me into something strong? Fine. I use that strength to ensure no other child endures what I endured, and you will help with that, not by choice, but by consequence. The chamber remained silent as Ember's words settled. She was not done. Finally, if you violate this exile, if you return again for any reason, there will be no trial, no deliberation. You will be executed on sight, not as punishment, but as removal of a proven threat. This is not mercy. This is pragmatism that refuses to waste resources on vengeance while ensuring you can never harm again. She turned back to the council. This solution honors pack law while adapting it to circumstances. It provides intelligence we need. It removes the ongoing threat. It creates preventive systems for the future. It transforms personal trauma into communal protection. And it demonstrates that Luna must be capable of making decisions that serve the greater good, even when every instinct screams for simpler justice. Aldrich looked at the other council members. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. Even Brennus, after a long moment, inclined his head in agreement. "This demonstrates moral sophistication beyond what we expected," Aldrich said. "You balance competing values without being paralyzed by their conflict. You choose solutions that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. You transform personal pain into communal benefit. That is Luna-level heart." He turned to address the full assembly. "Ember Thornheart has passed all 3 trials: wisdom, strength, heart. She has earned the right to stand as candidate Luna. Does anyone present challenge this finding?" Silence answered. Corvus stared at Ember with an expression she could not read. Hatred, certainly, but also something that might have been respect, grudging and bitter but real. "I made you stronger than you knew," he said quietly. "I was right about that, at least." "No," Ember replied. "I made myself strong by surviving you, by choosing to be better than you, by learning that strength without compassion is just brutality with a throne. You taught me what not to become. That is the only lesson I thank you for." Corvus was taken away, back to guarded cells where he would provide his intelligence before permanent exile. Ember watched him go, feeling the weight of the decision settle into her bones. She had faced her greatest fear and chosen wisdom over vengeance, had proven she could make impossible decisions when the cost was personal and the stakes were absolute. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for 3 days later, time enough to prepare, but not so long that momentum was lost. The intervening days passed in a blur of activity. Ember met with Theron's captured messenger, learning details of the planned assault that confirmed Corvus's intelligence was accurate. She worked with Aldrich to develop defensive strategies that would turn Theron's coordination against him. She studied ceremony protocols with Helene, learning the ancient rituals that would bind her to Garrick and to the pack. Magnus presented her with a gift the night before the ceremony. A blade, perfectly balanced, the steel marked with her initials and the date of her transformation. "Every Luna carries a blade," he explained, "not as primary weapon, but as symbol. Leadership requires the willingness to cut away what is diseased to protect what is healthy, to make hard choices, to bear the weight of necessary violence. This blade is yours. May you never have to use it, and may you always have the strength to do so when required." The full moon rose over the mountains on the night of the bonding, painting the world in silver light. The courtyard had been transformed, torches burning in circles, the ancient stone platform at the center where countless ceremonies had taken place over generations. The entire pack assembled, hundreds of them, witnessing the ritual that would make Ember their Luna. She wore the green dress, the one that showed her scars, but Helene had added ceremonial markings in silver paint across her shoulders and arms. Symbols of protection, strength, wisdom, and heart. The 4 pillars of Luna, earned through trials and proven through action. Garrick stood waiting at the platform, dressed in formal leathers and furs, his dark hair braided in the traditional alpha style, his gray eyes reflecting moonlight and something warmer. When Ember approached, Magnus walked beside her, the father figure she had chosen giving her away in the ceremony that marked new beginnings. "Who presents this woman to bond with our alpha?" Aldrich asked ritually. "I do," Magnus replied. "As witness to her strength, as teacher of her skills, as one who has seen her grow from survivor to warrior, I affirm she is worthy. Aldrich nodded. "Then let the bonding begin." The ceremony followed traditions older than the castle itself. Ember and Garrick knelt facing each other on the stone platform, hands clasped between them. A ceremonial blade was presented, silver and ancient, used for this purpose for centuries. "Blood calls to blood," Aldrich intoned in the old language. "Pack calls to pack. Two become one under the moon's blessing." The blade cut shallow lines across their palms. They pressed their bleeding hands together, their blood mingling as words of binding were spoken. Ember felt power surge through the connection, her wolf rising to meet Garrick's, recognizing and accepting the bond. The sensation was overwhelming, not loss of self, but expansion of it. She could feel his presence in her mind, his strength supporting hers, his certainty that they were meant for this. Then came the marking. Garrick shifted partially, his canines lengthening. He leaned forward, his breath warm against her throat, and bit down gently over her pulse point. The claiming mark that would identify her as Luna to every wolf who saw or scented her. Pain flared briefly, then transformed into heat and connection and belonging. Her turn. She shifted partially, feeling her own canines extend, and marked him in return. His shoulder, just above his heart. She felt his sharp intake of breath, felt the bond solidify between them, unbreakable and absolute. Two becoming one while remaining themselves. Partnership. Equals. When they separated, both breathing hard, Aldrich raised his hands to the assembly. "Behold your Alpha King and Luna, bound by blood and moon. Let any who would challenge this bonding speak now, or hold their peace forever." The pack began to howl, the sound building until it felt like the mountains themselves were singing, acceptance and celebration. Even those who had doubted, even those who had questioned, they all acknowledged the completion of the ritual. Ember's wolf rose in response, and for the first time, she howled with her pack. Not as an outsider or a victim, but as their Luna. The sound felt like freedom given voice. The formal ceremony concluded with Helene presenting Luna marks, ceremonial paint made from crushed silver leaves and blessed water. She drew traditional symbols across Ember's collarbones and down her arms, covering the old scars with new marks of power and authority. "These signify your role as Luna," Helene said, her voice thick with emotion. "Protector of the vulnerable, voice of wisdom, heart of the pack, wear them with the honor you have earned." The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. Food and drink flowed freely, music played. Pack members who had never spoken to Ember before approached with congratulations and offerings. Children brought her flowers. Warriors offered pledges of loyalty. Even Brennus bent his head in respect, acknowledging that she had proven herself beyond any doubt. Amid the celebration, a messenger arrived with news from the north. Theron Blackridge had sent word requesting peace talks, acknowledging that continued conflict served neither pack. The message spoke of historical grievances requiring mediation, of a desire to build forward rather than remain trapped by the past. Garrick showed Ember the letter. "What do you think, Luna? Do we meet with him?" The title still felt strange, but Ember considered the question seriously. "We meet. Strength means being willing to sit across from someone who hurt you and still seek resolution." 6 months passed. The peace talks with Theron resulted in a treaty that surprised both packs with its depth and sincerity. Theron's grief over his mate's execution 15 years ago had poisoned everything, but acknowledgement of that injustice, a memorial honoring all who had died in their conflicts, and a truth and reconciliation process created space for genuine healing. The Northern Alpha proved less enemy than fellow survivor of old wounds, and trade between their territories flourished. The survivor sanctuary Ember established in the castle now sheltered 7 families, each receiving counseling, training, and support as they rebuilt lives free from abuse. Ember met with them weekly, sharing her own story as proof that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. Corvus had been exiled permanently to the eastern wastes, his intelligence having prevented significant casualties when Theron's allies mounted a final half-hearted assault before the treaty talks began. Whether he reflected on his actions or justified them to the end, no one knew. Ember found she no longer cared. He was the past. She was building the future. She stood on the battlements one evening, Garrick beside her, watching the sun set over mountains that no longer felt threatening but protective. Below them, young warriors trained under Magnus's watchful eye, his methods gentler but no less effective, building up rather than breaking down, creating confidence rather than fear. "What do we teach our children about strength?" Garrick asked, his hand resting on her shoulder. Ember considered the question, thinking about all she had learned and all she had become. We teach them that strength comes from choice, not force, from healing, not hurting, that scars are evidence of survival, not shame, that compassion is not weakness, but the highest form of power. The pack had learned through her trials that worth was not determined by bloodline, but by choices made when costs were high. That Luna was not a title granted, but a role earned through wisdom, strength, and heart, demonstrated under pressure. As the full moon rose over the castle, two wolves ran through the forests together, one large and dark, one smaller with silver markings. They ran not from danger, but toward freedom, their howls blending into song. The Alpha King and his Luna, partners in every sense, leaders of a pack that had learned to see strength in unexpected places and value resilience as highly as any bloodline. And in the castle, in quarters that once housed a terrified servant girl, a candle burned in the window, a light in darkness, a beacon for those still suffering, a promise that change was possible, that healing could be chosen, that broken things could become whole if given courage to transform.